Friday, June the 12th, Yousef al Otaiba, UAE's ambassador to the United States and state minister and advisor to the Crown Prince UAE, wrote an op-ed in Israel's largest Hebrew newspaper, in which he directly appealed to the Israeli people against Netanyahu's annexation plan. It's an event that's been considered unprecedented by newspapers all over the world. Joining me today is Dr. Moeed Pirzada, prominent TV anchor and political commentator, to discuss this development and its significance for Pakistan. We thank you so much for joining me today.
Najma, thanks for giving me the opportunity to explain this important issue.
Why is this considered unprecedented?
It's very interesting why the Western world, major publications all across the United States and UK consider this unprecedented. First of all, we have to understand who is Yousef al Otaiba. Yousef al Otaiba is a very important figure of the political establishment and the royal family of the Abu Dhabi. He's very close to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, who is actually the son of Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, that was the founder of the Abu Dhabi and a very important player in the creation of the GCC. He's also a state minister with the government of Abu Dhabi. His wife, Moeed Pirzada, is a fashion designer. The couple together are considered very important, influential power couple within the diplomatic circles in Washington Beltway politics. And you also understand that Yousef al Otaiba's father, Mr. Otaiba, is a major oil magnate of Middle East, but of the global markets, not only of the Middle East, but of the global markets. He has been president of OPEC for 6 times, perhaps in a stretch. So you can understand this man is very close to the Abu Dhabi establishment. And on Thursday, on the 11th June, he issued a brief video message to the national paper, which is an English official publication of the state of Abu Dhabi. In this video message, he said that I have sent an op-ed piece to be published in the Hebrew publication. I think its name is Yadot Ernoth, which is the largest Hebrew circulation paper in Israel. And I have directly appealed and directly spoken to the people of Israel against the annexation policies of the Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he said that many people in the Muslim world or the Arab world, basically Arab world, he says, will not approve of my actions, but you have to take these actions in national interest. And he then referred to the Egyptian president, late Anwar Sadat, and his dash to Jerusalem in 1977, where he got the opportunity to address the Israeli people on the peace plan. And he said, I'm not going to fly to Tel Aviv, but I have appealed to the Israeli public to take a position against Netanyahu's annexation plan. And then he goes on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you wanted to say something? Yes.
Is there a particular part of the plan that he's against? I mean, is there a specific policy that he's against, or what is the specific thing that he's appealing against?
I will come to it, but first of all, let me explain to you that not only New York Times and British publications and European publications, but almost all publications in Israel, the English and mainstream publications, have published the transcripts or have discussed this his op-ed piece and have considered unprecedented step that an important Arab diplomat, or basically a figure of the political establishment of Abu Dhabi, is actually speaking and making an appeal directly to the Israeli public against an Israeli sitting government. The significance also lies in the fact that Abu Dhabi is very close to Saudi Arabia, and both Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia are trying to establish some sort of quasi-official diplomatic relationship with the state of Israel. We know that Jordan accepted Israel, recognized Israel, Egypt recognized, Turkey had long-standing relationship from 1948-49. So Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Oman, and Qatar, they all have some sort of relationship with the state of Israel. So this is the background and the context. Now coming to your question, what specifically?
I'd like to ask you now, how did the Israeli government react to this? Because after all, there must have been approvals within the system that the newspaper must have got before publishing the UAE's letter. Or do you think it's
very
democracy?
Very interesting question. Very interesting question. Apparently, there has been no reaction as of now from Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is probably silent on it. And regarding your question that how could this be published without the Israeli government, you see, what we don't understand here in this part of the world is that Israel, for the Israelis and for the Jewish population, Israel is a perfect sort of democracy. It may not be a perfect democracy for its Palestinian subjects, because there are Palestinian subjects and citizens within the formal Israel, apart from the occupied territories of West Bank, Ramallah, and other areas. So for the Palestinian subjects, Israel might not be in exact democracy, but Israel is a democracy, and no one needs the permission of the Israeli prime minister or the government. No publication would look toward them. Israeli press often takes very strong, strident positions against Netanyahu and his Israeli government, and most of the Israeli press, especially the English press, like Haaretz, if you look at this, they are very anti-Netanyahu. They are very fairly moderate and on the left side of the Israeli politics. So there no publication, no permission was formally required.
So on this, what about Saudi Arabia? I mean, they're very obviously an important player in that region. Have we heard anything from Saudi Arabia?
Saudi Arabia has not spoken on this, but Saudi publications have probably reported about it. Saudi Arabia is very closely aligned with UAE. If there is one state in the GCC with which Saudi Arabia is strategically aligned, almost like Siamese twin, that is the Abu Dhabi UAE, and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed and Sultan and Nahyan is also very close to Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And sometimes the Western publications write in-depth analysis, and they say that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed is in fact more influential of the two, in the sense that he has a more stronger and strategic mindset, and he even dictates his mindset to Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So both countries are together. UAE is taking a position.
You were going to explain the annexation plan.
You know, before the 9th April Israeli election, the Prime Minister Netanyahu promised to his supporters and electorates that after July sometime and before the US election, he will formally annex the Golan Heights and also the settlements, which are the illegal settlements of Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Now, there's a lot of resistance against it, of course, from the Palestinians, also from the Israeli liberal left, but also from the settlers. Because the settlers actually think that if West Bank is settlements are formally annexed into Israel proper, then the scope for further settlements would be curtailed. And they're very greedy and they're very eager for further settlements. However, Washington and Donald Trump's government, the administration, are supporting Netanyahu in this. And Saudi Arabia and UAE, which have been angling to develop closer scientific, technological, diplomatic, and sort of economic and trade relationship with Israel, and who are now, the significance of this op-ed is this, that this op-ed signifies that UAE and their backer Saudi Arabia are worried that if Netanyahu goes along with the formal annexation of the West Bank and Jordan Valley, then the Arab Street Palestinians, especially the Palestinians in Jordan itself, would react, and there would be a sort of a political reaction on the Arab street, which will jeopardize their process of engagement with Israel. And this much the op-ed says. The op-ed says that, you know, there is now an acceptability to have a formal relationship with Israel, a diplomatic relationship, sport events. Look how we have invited Israel formally to 2020 Dubai Expo, which has now been rescheduled for 2021. And also there are some kind of half behind the scene diplomatic relationship through United Nations, then in conferences and seminars, whether in Oman or in Qatar or in Dubai, one of the other forms, the Israelis are participating. Yes, go ahead.
Holding this towards Pakistan, what significance is this holding now for Pakistan?
I think it has a huge significance for Pakistan. Pakistan's policy on Israel suffers from strategic paralysis. Pakistan has to take a clear position on the issue of Middle East and Israel. And Pakistan's initial position on Israel was that its position was in accordance for the Palestinian people and in accordance with the wishes of its Arab friends. Now, since the Palestinians are dealing, since the Oslo Accord, Palestinian Authority has recognized Israel, whatever the difficulties are, they have recognized Israel, they deal with Israel, they sit with Israel. Jordan recognizes Israel, Egypt has recognized Israel, Turkey has diplomatic relationship with Israel, and we see that so many other Arab countries in GCC, now Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, and Abu Dhabi, are trying to or are engaged with Israel on one or the other level. So Pakistan's whole approach towards Israel suffers from what you can describe in the term called strategic paralysis. Ever since in the early 90s, India used Israel to land in Washington, which is called as landing in Washington via Tel Aviv, to engage United States through the good offices of Israel. Pakistani governments and establishment have on more than one occasion tried engaging Israel. The most visible effort was done by General Musharraf's regime when Israeli foreign minister and General Musharraf probably met in Switzerland, in Davos, and other places,
So when
and they were engaged.
you say
Yes.
strategic paralysis, is it paralysis at the state and the government level, the bureaucracy level, or is it paralysis at the communication of to the population level?
I think the paralysis exists at all levels. However, the biggest problem is Pakistani state institutions, Foreign Office, military, and Pakistani political parties. They have not been able to come up with a political strategy and a political communication to convince the public that we have our own genuine interests in Middle East vis-a-vis Israel. So Pakistani public opinion, when you look at the Urdu publications and even English publications, you look at Pakistan's large television media, columnists, and all the media space and all the public space, in every city, in religious community, in political parties, there is a knee-jerk reaction to the word Israel. Saying word Israel or recognizing Israel is like saying fire in an auditorium or in a cinema house, and everyone gets panicked. There is a knee-jerk reaction to it. So Pakistani state institutions and Pakistani major political parties like PTI, PMLN, PPP, and other parties have to develop some political communication, strategic communication for the Pakistani people to understand that what is the nature of our dispute with Israel and how we can leverage ourselves better in the Middle Eastern politics by engaging Israel at some level, maybe not openly, maybe not visibly. So the problem so far is,
when you say that the state and the parties have to engage with their people, do the parties themselves understand? I mean, do our politicians, do they not think like the street people? I mean, why do you think they think differently?
Yes. Now, that's a very good question, very relevant question. I've spoken to several people off the record in the last couple of years because I think, one of the only, if not one of the few, perhaps one of the only public figures in Pakistani media that often falls into trouble, or my folks create trouble for myself by taking this position for the past several years. And I think some of the top politicians and Pakistani establishment, of course, understands the significance of it. But no one is prepared to risk, because anyone who comes forward and takes an initiative is afraid of the consequence. That is why I said that state institutions, Pakistan Foreign Office, Pakistani establishment, Pakistani media, tycoons, and Pakistani political parties have to understand this issue, have to understand the complexity of that issue. Because just let me add one sentence, and many people who are listening to us will understand what is the complexity. If Pakistan's historic position since 1947-48, which is often referred to, or since 1967 Arab-Israel war, when Israel became an extremely hateable word in the Arab world and the Muslim street, Pakistani position was its solidarity with the Arab world. So Pakistanis were against the state of Israel. We had our emotions because we were expressing our brotherhood and solidarity with the Muslim world. Now, when the Arab world itself is changing, now when the Arab world is engaging Israel at multiple levels, as we have again seen, not only this op-ed piece which has been published by Yousef al Otaiba, we have seen direct flights between Abu Dhabi and Israel in the last few days. We have also seen some sort of flights between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and we have seen engagement and expression at several levels. So for us now to take an emotional position against Israel raises the question that what is the basis of our diplomatic position against Israel? If Arabs can engage Israel, if Palestinians can engage Israel, just one more word, and if we don't have any relationship or recognition or issue or engagement process with Israel, that means we are taking some sort of religious and ideological position against the state of Israel. And historically speaking, despite all the misgivings and all the confusion in Pakistan, the Muslim world and Jews had no problem with each other. Jews have been living, from the 7th century, 8th century onwards, after the initial problems the Jews have been living in every Muslim city, whether it was Tehran or it was Damascus or it was Cairo, it was Mughal India or it was the Ottoman Empire. Wherever the Muslims had a government, Jews were doing the business and trade. They were very respected members of the society. Jewish physicians and scientists were contributing to the Muslim kingdoms. The problem started with Nakba in 1948, when the Palestinians ran off because of the Arab-Israel conflict. Now we have to see Israel through the prism of the Arab-Israel conflict, not through the prism of some sort of religious doctrine. And this is where the problem is. There's such toxicity on the issue of Israel that within Pakistan, it is seen through the prism of religious doctrine. And this is where a political communication is needed.
We thank you so much for your time. Obviously, another whole session is needed on Pakistan and Israel. And we will definitely do that at some point. But for today, thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me explain this.
Thank you. Bye.